Thanks so much for the introduction and inviting us. Those presentations so far have been super impressive, really cool apps. And this one is maybe a little less rocket science than those, but just to give a quick background on how mapping is being used to set priorities for invasive plant management these days. The California Invasive Plant Council is a nonprofit organization. We have a statewide board of directors and membership. We work with partners on invasive plants in a lot of places across the state, including rangeland. So for this brief field note presentation, I'd like to use a story about two rangeland weeds. And interestingly enough, for those who were on a little bit early, we talked about yellow star thistle and woolly distaff thistle. They already came up. And to use a story of these two weeds to make the point that strategy, of course, is important for successfully tackling invasive plants, and mapping is essential for setting strategy. So here's a somewhat too common scene in the Central Valley. This field of a ranch is entirely taken over by yellow star thistle, affectionately known by some as California state weed. It's taken over some 14% of the state, degrading rangeland. Earlier, when we did have the conversation, somebody, perhaps Sheila Berry, was mentioning the possibility of training cattle to eat yellow star thistle and distaff thistle using molasses, et cetera. So that's really interesting to hear about, and I'd like to hear more about that. But I don't think too many folks are taking advantage of that strategy at this point. So it's generally a pretty unpalatable forage at later growth stages. And so many landowners, like the one in the picture in the background here, are using various ways, spraying herbicides, et cetera, to try to control the weeds. So if I'm a land manager looking at this, my biggest concern is probably that yellow star thistle, which is covering a lot of area. But the point I want to make, and that we encounter often in our community as land managers of going out to a property, is that we may not be as interested in the yellow star thistle in this case as the woolly distaff thistle, which isn't taking up so much room. But that's what I want to explain why. So at a meeting this last December with other Western states, an annual meeting, Scott Marsh from Kansas came up with this gem, which is probably something that many folks have said, but it seemed to me to really capture what we in the field talk about a lot when we talk about early detection, rapid response. It's basically the common sense that a stitch in time saves 9, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, those concepts. And so if we look at statewide distribution maps of those two weeds, you look at yellow star thistle on the left, and there's a lot of data in this map that we're not going to talk about, what do the black symbols and X's, et cetera, mean, but all of those USGS quads that are colored in are infested. And so you can see that yellow star thistle is really taken hold over a large part of the state. And then on the right, you can see that woolly distaff thistle is, got some areas where it's bad in the Bay Area. It's got a Central Coast issue. And then there are some outlier populations, and I don't know if my cursor is visible, but out here in the Central Valley, a few up in Northern California, some way down in Southern California, a few in the Sierra. So that's a completely different distribution. And the woolly distaff thistle doesn't look so bad from this case, which is true. But this is today's snapshot. So how might it look in the future? Well, to answer that, let's first look to the past. This is a kind of fuzzy graph pulled out of California Agriculture magazine about 15 years ago. But basically the history of yellow star thistle in California from when it was first introduced in the mid 1800s to today shows something that's fairly typical. A long lag phase while a plant species kind of gets acclimated to a new a new home. This is originally from Eurasia. I think it's thought that it was introduced, though, via South America, but then pretty explosive growth in the last half century. And that's something that, if it can be avoided, if we could go back in time in a time machine and treat that first yellow star thistle, that can make a really big difference. So I want to talk a little bit about how mapping is used to set this effective strategy. Certainly those outlier populations are important to get early before they can spread. We'd like to keep Distaff thistle from becoming the next yellow star thistle, and there's a lot of other plants that are not widespread yet, that are just getting started. And it's a little bit difficult to train ourselves to think that way, because when you've got a lot of a weed in front of you, that's what grabs your attention. So fortunately, we do have a lot of tools that are getting better and better every year. For mapping in the field, we can now use our smartphones and have a pretty detailed data dictionary, as shown on the top right there, and that data can be uploaded into an online database. Like in California, the CalFlora database is kind of the spot of choice that folks use, but other things like iNaturalist for volunteers can be used as well. Some of that data, depending on its quality, flows into CalFlora. There are national systems like EdMaps out of University of Georgia. A lot of systems out there, and the trend is towards them all sharing data so that we can then see things at the landscape level. So that's another level of mapping that is crucial for helping to make decisions at the larger level. So this is zoomed in on woolly distaff thistle in the Cal Weed Mapper tool, and the photograph from the beginning is in here in the Capay Valley, part of the Central Valley. And you can see that there's a lot of area around it that's not infested. And so that's the goal, by deciding, hey, this may be a priority to work on, more so than maybe in the middle of some of these infestations.
Doug, you're down to 2 minutes and a half.
Okay, thank you. So in the foreground here, the Distaff Thistle, the goal being, hey, let's keep it from spreading over all this territory where it could also cause damage. So we're working on this at the statewide level through a couple of different pathways. One is Advocacy. So this is a report that we published recently in partnership with the California Landscape Stewardship Network. It's designed for California state agency decision makers, and contains recommendations for ways to strengthen the state system, including mini grants to weed management areas in counties across the state. We're working on targets like woolly distaff thistle. This is one I thought I would bring up, desert knapweed down in San Diego County. We have the honor and, I guess, responsibility of having the only infestations in the US currently, and modeling shows that it could grow across the Southwest and into northern Mexico as well. So we're trying to figure out how to stop that. And it's not just a biological question, it's a jurisdictional question, as you figure out which agencies are going to pony up to try to make this happen on private lands. We're working with the State Department of Food and Agriculture and the county ag commissioners to develop regional strategies across the state for multi-county regions, and then try to direct funding towards managing those strategies. Excuse me, the weeds in those strategies. And just so you don't, I'm guessing most folks here know about biocontrol agents, but that yellow star thistle that's widespread, it doesn't mean that we just ignore that. The kind of approach that can be successful, as it was with Klamath weed back in the 20th century across rangelands in California, could potentially be successful with some of today's weeds as well. So we work closely with the state and with the federal partners in developing biocontrol agents that can try to knock back some of these widespread weeds. So in closing, just to mention that there are lots of resources out there on invasive plants. Our website is kind of a hub for those, and they point to lots of other websites like the University of California, on both the weed species themselves and then best management practices. We're working on a decision support tool with UC ANR currently for non-chemical methods, and hopefully a follow-up that will look at herbicides as well.